So, for this video, I'm going to be going over this Twitter exchange I had with a moral realist. So, it starts with this guy, SB, posting this meme saying, I despise moral relativism. And if we click on the meme, it has this guy with a hot iron saying, Sorry, but I'm a moral relativist. Your suffering is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And then we have this guy in pain saying, It's meaningful to me, you piece of shit. Yeah, so I then reply, I say, Not sure what you mean by moral relativism here. I don't take moral relativism to entail that suffering is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And then this guy replies, The hot Iron Man does. That's his view, and a moral relativist has no argument against him. All moral codes are valid. Now, you already see here that this guy is kind of walking back on his original point. Because now he's claiming, oh, like the hot Iron Man thinks this, and a moral relativist has no argument against him. But, the original point of the meme was not just that a moral relativist has no argument against him, it was that this guy is the moral relativist. So he just seems to be walking that back and just going to some other point. But anyway, I humor him on this, and I say, what does it mean for a moral code to be valid? I see this a lot from realists. They'll say, oh, well, if you're a relativist, you have to say that all moral codes are equally valid. And it's just like, well, what do you mean by valid? So he says, sorry, valid is a word I would use. A moral relativist might say all moral codes are on the same footing. Now, the same footing is going to have a similar problem. On the same footing in terms of what? And that's what I say. In terms of objective truth, because I don't see how that's going to be a problem. Then he says, okay, and it's important actually to note that the same footing thing is kind of ambiguous, right? Like, two moral codes can be in the same footing as, like, oh, okay, these moral codes are both equally good. And it's like a moral relativist is not dedicated to saying that. A moral relativist can say, yeah, like, your moral code is trash and mine is way better. That's perfectly consistent with moral relativism. Now, a moral relativist is going to be committed to saying, well, okay, they're on the same footing in terms of objective truth. Neither one of these moral codes is objectively correct. But then it's like, well, what's the problem with saying that? I don't see what the issue is supposed to be. Then he says, You are a vegan, we share a morality. This conversation might go well. Well, it doesn't end up going so well, but what do you ground your morality in? How do you make moral decisions? And then I say, well, we share a certain applied ethical position. I'd wager that our normative ethics are quite different. Not sure what you mean by what I ground my morality in. Are you just asking what my meta-ethical position is? Then he says, Say you had an impulse to step on a mouse. Why would you override that impulse and choose not to step on that mouse? I'm assuming you would. Then I just say because I don't like causing suffering, inflicting suffering on others. Then he asks, why? People ask these sorts of questions a lot. They'll be like, you'll say, oh, I don't like causing suffering. And they'll be like, oh, why? And it's not entirely clear what sort of question they're trying to ask. And I say that here, is this meant to be a normative ethical question? If so, I don't have any deeper value to appeal to. It's just an intrinsic value I have. And if you're asking some other sort of question, like why am I psychologically constituted such that I have an aversion to suffering, I don't know what the answer to that is. And then he says, this is really starts getting silly. I guess what I'm getting at is if you maintain your ethics and you hit your head hard enough and lose that personality trait of caring, you'd be stepping on ice. According to your ethics, it's not about the mouse's suffering, it's about your random feelings of guilt. So, this is a talking point I hear quite a lot from realists. Um, it's cropped up often enough that Lance Bush has an article responding to it called "To Wake Up as a Villain," and I actually post that here in this thread. And I'll post the link to that in the description. I recommend you guys check it out. It's a good article. Now, this is a really bad objection to anti-realism, though, because as I point out here, an analogous objection could be made to the realist. And I say, if you were to be convinced that it was objectively morally good to step on mice, you do so. It's not suffering you care about, but rather complying with the stance independent moral facts. Yeah, so if realists want to play this game of saying, oh, well, if you had different attitudes, that shows, and you would then act on those attitudes, that shows that, you don't really care about suffering. You just care about your feelings. And I just don't see how the realist is in any different of a position. It's like, yeah, well, it does. If you're going to say that I don't really care about the suffering, I don't see how you really care about the suffering either, because we can also just construct hypotheticals in which you would have different attitudes, and you also wouldn't care and would be fine inflicting it. So, it's a very weird objection. Suffering is a core consideration in moral reasoning under my view. It's like saying if you learn that it was logically it's like saying if you learn that it was logically consistent to be logically inconsistent, then you'd have to be logically consistent. It's a nonsensical statement. Now, this is just a completely absurd thing to say. As I point out, these aren't analogous at all. At being logically consistent to be logically inconsistent is logically impossible. It is not logically impossible for you to believe that it's a stance-independent moral fact that it's good to step on mice. If you think it is, what is the contradiction? And then he makes this completely bizarre claim. It's logically impossible that I'd abandon caring about suffering as a core value, just as it's impossible that I'd forego logical consistency as a core value. How are either of these things logically impossible? What an absurd claim to make. And I ask him, okay, if you're going to say it's logically impossible, what is the contradiction? Then he says, suffering matters under my view. It's a pillar. Your argument is, what if I learned suffering didn't matter? That would upend my entire view. Like learning logical consistency didn't matter, and randomness was the gold standard of thinking. Yeah, you'll notice, and this is a trend here, that I keep asking him what the contradiction is, and he keeps replying with things that are not contradictions. Like, this stuff is just completely irrelevant. Like, what that would upend my entire view. Okay, what is the relevance? Do you think that something upending your entire view is logically impossible? I mean, if I found out that I was the only conscious organism on Earth, that would upend my entire worldview. Does that mean that there's no logically possible world in which I'm the only conscious organism on Earth? I mean, there obviously is. It's an absurd statement. This has nothing to do with logical possibility. Then I reply, since you still have not provided one, I'll ask for a third time, what is the contradiction? To be clear, the hypothetical was just about you coming to form a belief that stepping on mice is objectively good. But yeah, this is actually important because you'll note that he says, your argument is, what if I learned suffering didn't matter? Like, learned, the way he uses that specific term, learned, it kind of comes with a connotation that I'm building into the hypothetical that it's objectively morally good to step on mice in this hypothetical. And it's like, no, that's not part of the hypothetical. It's just about you believing that that's morally good, objectively. Hypothetical says nothing about the truth value of that belief. And then he says, I'm not sure how to word this in a way that makes sense to you. The problem seems very clear to me. Perhaps in the morning I will understand and learn how to communicate if you can. Spend some time trying to understand my argument here. See if you can see why I object. Yeah. So still not naming a contradiction. And then I have to ask him, okay, do you actually know what a logical contradiction is? It's a proposition in its negation, P and not P. Then I give an example. The sky is blue and the sky is not blue. This is what I'm looking for when I ask for a contradiction. Then he says, I explained a clear way for you to decide to step on the mouse consistent with your present views on morality. Your way for me to step on a mouse is to claim that I don't actually care about suffering and that some fact could convince me to step on the mouse. I'm telling you that I do care about suffering. My morality is built on caring about suffering. If we want to use P, you say I don't care about B, and I'm telling you I care about B. So we see here that he still, even after I explained it to him, he doesn't seem to understand what a logical contradiction is, which I point out to him. I say, look. I tell him, basically, look, I don't want to continue this conversation over text. It's getting tedious to keep asking for a contradiction and not get one. And then I say, look, if you're not going to be able to provide the contradiction, you should just retract the claim. And it's like, yeah, if you're going to make the claim that a given hypothetical is logically impossible, I expect you to be able to provide the contradiction. And if you're not able to provide the contradiction, I just don't see why you're even making statements about logical impossibility in the first place. Also, this thing he says here, I explained a clear way for you to decide to step on the mouse consistent with your present views on morality. This is just completely false. If we go back to the hypothetical that he gave me, it's specifically in his hypothetical that I lose the personality trait of caring about suffering. So, no, in this hypothetical, I don't share the same present views on morality. In fact, your hypothetical your hypothetical completely changes my normative ethic into something completely different from what it actually is. You present me with a hypothetical situation in which I have completely different moral views. So I don't know why he says, "Oh, well, my way of having you decide to step on the mouse is completely consistent with your present views on morality." Like, no, they're not. Your hypothetical was one in which I had completely different views on morality. And I just don't understand why realists love to use this talking point of, oh, like, say you had different desires, then you would act differently. You would do these immoral things. Yeah, if I had the desire to do immoral things, I would do immoral things. I like, okay, what is the point of this supposed to be? The same thing could be said about the realist. We act on our desires. If a realist had the desire to do immoral things, and suppose they thought those immoral things were objectively good, they would also do immoral things. It's like presenting it's like presenting someone with a hypothetical in which you say, all right, say we take a logically possible world in which you're going to take a baby's head and bash their head into the pavement. In this hypothetical possible world where you're going to take the baby's head and bash it into the pavement, are you going to take the baby's head and bash it into the pavement? Okay, sure. If you're just stipulating in the hypothetical that I have these evil attitudes, then sure. But, like, what is this supposed to prove? Like, it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't demonstrate that there's anything unethical or morally problematic about my current views. Um, it's just bizarre. Oh, and this claim that, oh, well, the fact that you would act differently if you didn't care about the mouse's suffering, that somehow shows that you don't care about the mouse's suffering. Okay, how does it show that? I just don't understand how the fact that I would act differently in a logically possible world in which I don't care about the mouse's suffering is supposed to demonstrate that in the actual world I don't care about the mouse's suffering. I mean, we all we all care about our feelings. We don't the reason we refrain from performing these sorts of actions is because we care about suffering. We have a desire not to cause people suffering. So, yeah, if you just create a hypothetical in which we don't have the desire to not inflict suffering on people, and we have a desire to do it, yeah, we're going to do that. I just don't see what the point of playing these sorts of games is. I don't know. Like, I don't get into these conversations very much on Twitter, and this conversation, I would say, is a perfect demonstration of why it just goes nowhere. People love to make these absurd claims, and they just can't defend them. You'll see here, just ask for the contradiction several times, doesn't name one. Yeah. So I guess I don't really have much else to say, so I'll just leave it there. Oh, actually, one more thing. I forgot to mention this in the initial video I recorded, but I don't get this obsession with, oh, well, if you're a moral relativist, you have no argument against this psychopath that's torturing you. Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is just a false claim. A moral relativist can very easily come up with an argument for why the behavior that this person is engaging in is morally impermissible. Now, you might say, Okay, well, it's not going to be a persuasive argument to him. And yeah, sure, it probably won't be, but the same thing is true uh, for a realist that gives an argument. Like, I just don't get what this obsession with arguments is supposed to be. Like, it's as if this person imagines, they're being tortured by this guy with the hot iron, and then you come out and you say, "Oh wait, I'm a moral realist. Here, you have to look at this. I have a formal syllogism written out right here. Premise, conclusion. Here's the conclusion. It is stance independently wrong for you to torture me." And do they think that the torturer is just going to go, "Oh, okay, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, I'm going to stop torturing you now. After all, it does violate the stance independent moral facts." Like, no, they're not going to care about that shit. They're going to keep on torturing you anyway. So, yeah, I don't really get with this obsession with, oh, like, you know, we need to have an argument against this guy. Like, it doesn't do anything. Like, what's it supposed to achieve? It's just like while you're being tortured, you feel better because you get to say, well, this is morally wrong. Instead of objectively speaking, instead of it just being my preference, this makes me feel better while I'm being tortured. I don't get it. Okay, for real now, this is the end of the video.